Welcome to the Ripple Effect. My name is Pastor Mike Hofer, and I'm joined by my partner in crime,
Pastor Cedric Hill.
Amen. And today we're continuing our conversation over this idea of the calling. We've been in this series at Christ Community Church titled The Calling. And during this podcast titled The Ripple Effect, our whole goal is to talk about and conversate about how do we continue the ripple of what we hear on Sunday morning throughout the week. How do we do that Monday through Saturday, Monday through Sunday, in our own context, in our own communities, out in the marketplace, out in the neighborhoods, in our schools, in our homes? How do we continue the message that we hear on Sunday morning that is kind of like a rock being thrown in a pond that creates ripples? Now, how do we create those ripples all throughout the week?
That's dope.
And today we want to continue this conversation. Last week, during our episode, we talked about context and how do we, in whatever context you're in, how do you serve God in your calling, in the calling? And during this whole series, if you want to hear the rest of the series, you can go to ccclive.org, and we have all of our messages archived there. I think back from the Stone Ages, like back before Jesus, we got messages that go way back. So you can go there and check it out. But this whole series, we had an introductory message that was really well done by Pastor Kelly, and then we talked about abilities. What is your abilities? What are your God-given abilities? Everybody has abilities. Like even the most introverted of people have abilities. And then what about your passions? How have you been knitted together by God to be passionate about things? And then this week, then last week, we talked about context. So if you take your abilities, your passions, and your context, and you put all of those things together, and it creates what we call the sweet spot.
Yes.
So it's kind of like that idea that when you're doing those three things, and it's kind of like a car when it's hitting on all 8 cylinders.
Yeah.
You hear that rev in that engine, and it just sounds amazing. It goes fast, and it goes where it needs to go.
Yeah.
And that's the sweet spot. And so we had a guy this week share a little bit of his testimony who was an exceptional baseball player named Bruce Chapman. And Bruce talked about how on a baseball bat there is a sweet spot. Like you can hit it on any part of the bat and possibly get a base hit or a double or whatever. But when you hit the sweet spot on a bat, right at the core of the bat, the ball is going to go farther, faster, and longer than it would if you hit it on any other space.
Yeah.
And that's kind of like the context of the sweet spot that we talked about this week. When your abilities, your passions, and your context meet up and connect for the kingdom, we all have this sweet spot where we do the best for the kingdom.
Yeah. You know the cool part about the illustration he used, Mike, is before he talked about the sweet spot, he talked about other parts of the bat that you can hit the ball on. Right. Like you can hit the ball. You can hit the ball on the edge. Correct. But you're going to feel this pins and needles stinging in your hands. Right. Or you can hit it down closer to the bottom of it and you might break it. Mm-hmm. And so I think it was this wonderful illustration of how we're all kind of swinging a bat in this journey with Christ. And how there's, I think there's even parts of the Christian journey where you're kind of fumbling around, you're hitting it on the edge, you're breaking bats, you're having to get new ones. Yep. And you're hurting yourself, you're hurting other people, you're finding the right way to do things until you finally hit that sweet spot. And I thought that was a wonderful, wonderful illustration, not just of the perfection of hitting the sweet spot, but also of kind of what it takes to get there. Because it's a journey, it's a process. A calling is not a one moment type thing. It's a journey to getting there. Absolutely. I personally I heard the call to ministry 5 years ago. Mm-hmm. I started working in ministry 6 months ago. Right. Absolutely. And a lot of that was hitting the edge of it, hitting the ball with the edge of that bat, breaking stuff. Trying to figure it out. Yeah, hurting myself. Uh-huh. And I think being committed to the journey of your calling, being committed figuring out what your passion, abilities, contexts are, to honing your abilities, to working on the things that God has given you. I think it's not just about what God has given you, but it's also about what you're doing with it.
Yeah, that's right.
And so I thought the illustration was really, really cool.
It was great, man. And I played a lot of baseball growing up. I played travel ball. I played all over the place. And I remember we were playing a game one time, and a friend of mine was at the bat, and he even ducked. The ball was coming at him, and he ducked, and the ball hit the knob of the bat, but it didn't hit him, and it goes fair, and he gets on first base. Yeah. Like, it counted as a hit, and he didn't even swing the bat. Yeah. And I think sometimes, man, when we deal with this idea of calling, we're in that space, like we're getting on base. Yeah. But it wasn't real cool. It wasn't a great hit. It wasn't like ESPN moment. It was basically an accident, and he gets on base. And sometimes, I know in my own personal life, there were years, man, where I accidentally got on base. Like, I didn't know what I was doing. Yeah. I felt my story is unique in the idea that I felt called to the ministry even before I probably even understood who Jesus was. Wow. Like, in 1990, which is about the same time I started going to church, 89, 90. Yeah, I'm old. I was 19, 20 years old. 15, 16 years old. And I remember I hadn't been what you would consider saved for maybe 6 months. Yeah. And that was like a youth camp saved. Like, everybody went to the altar, so I went to the altar, and I was crying because everybody else was crying. Not that God wasn't doing the real work, but it was, you know how youth camp is sometimes. And I love youth camp, absolutely. But I probably only been following Jesus maybe 5 or 6 months, and we went to this big conference, youth conference in Cincinnati, 1990, and heard a guy by the name of John Maxwell speak, and everybody knows him. He was like this big leadership dude. But before he was a big leadership guy, he was just a pastor. He pastored a Wesleyan church in California, and he gave this sermon about calling, like being called to do things for God. And now, I remember back then, calling kind of got hijacked. Yeah. It was this, you were only called to be a pastor or a missionary. Right. And I guess nobody else was called. Like, you couldn't be called to do anything else. But we're going to talk about that in a second. Yeah. But so I felt like this pull for me to do something bigger and deeper for the kingdom. Yeah. And he gave this little altar call, and we had these like little leadership books. And he said, if you feel called by God to do something bigger with your life, come and lay that book at the altar with your name. And and that's what I did, man. And I didn't really even understand Jesus. And so for the next 10 years, man, I was hitting the ball off the end of the bat. Like, I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know what a calling was. I just knew that God was said to me, like, there's something bigger in your life that you need to do. Yeah. And so I didn't get that. Like, I didn't get what that was all about. And during these last 3 weeks, man, we've really been digging into those ideas of ability and context and passions and the sweet spot. Yeah. Yeah. I think the really cool thing about what you said that I really hope would encourage anybody that's listening, it encourages me, is you said God called you before you even really understood. Yeah. And I think sometimes I can slip into the thinking that there's a certain level of things I need to understand, or there's a certain level of things I need to get right before God calls me. Absolutely. Or before God will, before God will place a calling on my life. Yeah. And I love that God's nature is such that He'll call you, but then He'll get you there too. Yes. And so you don't need to be there when He calls you. Yeah. He'll get you there, and you just have to honor a relationship with Him and honor a process by which you get to the place that He's trying to get you to. And I think it's one of the amazing things about our God. You know, it's really, really cool. Absolutely. Yeah, I think, we see it all throughout the Bible, the scriptures, where God calls these people that by any other standard are unqualified. Yeah. Like Noah, the drunk. Yeah. Moses was a murderer. David's an adulterer and a murderer. Yeah. Like, think about that today. Like, seriously. Yeah. If you knew somebody was a murderer, Like, would you follow that person? Like, would you, especially in today's context, like we vilify the sin and the sinner. And it's like, I don't know that I would follow him. Like, I'm being honest from my own perspective. But those people in the Bible, and sometimes I think we get caught up looking at the people in the Bible and seeing them as either not real or some sort of superhuman. But they were just normal people like us. They're just normal folks that God happened to call to something and then equip them and give them the Holy Spirit and give them the abilities and the passions and the context to be able to live that out. Yeah. And so I was real encouraged with that whole idea during this series, is that I don't have to be Superman or Superwoman. I don't have to be superhuman to be called by God. I don't have to be extremely qualified. I don't have to have a master's degree in theology. I just have to be available, man, and say, hey, I'm good at that. I'm passionate about it, and it fits into where God has placed me right now in this moment, which is context. And then follow where God is moving, because I heard somebody say this last week, and I was so like, wow, that's it. Like, God is already working in people's lives. Yeah, right. Like, he doesn't need me to go over there and talk to somebody. He's already working in that person's life. But he chooses to partner with us in ministry. Yeah. Like, he chooses to say, hey, I want you to join in on this person's story. And he's put us in that context, gave us the abilities, the passions to be able to do those things. Yeah. Yeah. That's our sweet spot. Yeah. And I think I think that really segues into the ordinary people thing. I think that really segues into Pastor Derek's main point from the sweet spot message. Yeah. It's this spot where all of these things intersect, but it's also the spot where you're serving. Right. You know, and when we talk about when you talk about all of those people in the biblical story, Mike, all of them committed to serving other people. You know, and regardless of what God asked them to do, it was in service to other people that they did those things, regardless of what God is asking us to do, regardless of where he's asking us to do it. You can serve people, you can serve God, you can serve this world by doing in any context that you find yourself in any job that you find yourself in. And I think it's in our world, it's the hardest thing to remember that, to remember that our calling is to serve. Our calling is whatever it is to serve other people, it's to serve God. And I thought Pastor Derek bringing that point home, that to really focus a message around the fact that you're not just called for yourself. You're not just called to get accolades, to get praise, to get fame, power, money, whatever. It's in service to other people. If God calls you to something, if God elevates you, if God blesses you, whatever it looks like, it is for the service of other people. That's right. And I love just laser focusing in on that thing to really remind us, like, wherever this spot merges at, whether it's a doctor, a lawyer, a pastor, a teacher, absolutely. Whether you're supposed to start a business, whether you're supposed to work at a nonprofit, it's all in service to other people. And I think reminding us of that and keeping that at the forefront of our minds, and to remind us that Jesus said he didn't come to be served. He came to serve. That's right. And if that's what he was supposed to do, it's definitely what we're supposed to be doing. Absolutely. My goodness. Yeah. I think sometimes, especially in North America, we suffer from I'll do it when syndrome. Oh, yeah. Like, I'll do it when I get enough money. I'll do it when I get enough degrees. I'll do it when the timing is perfect. I'll do it when it's convenient. I'll do it when. And we forget that God is always moving. Yeah. Like, always moving. Yeah. That person in your office that you can't stand. Yeah. God is working in that person's life. God loves that person more than you'll ever hate that person. Man, I'm telling you. And I think we forget that sometimes, and that we're just being asked to come along, and because we've been put in that context, to use the abilities we already have. Yeah. So I look at it this way. Like, if you have the ability to speak, go speak to a person. Yep. If you have the ability to write,
Yeah.
Write that person a letter.
So good.
Write them a note. Write them a text. Write them an email. Whatever. If you have the ability to create something for that person.
Yeah.
Like, so you have this ability, these passions, and the context. That's your sweet spot. Like no matter where you are, whether you're a trash person, like you're picking up trash for the city, or you're in school. Like age doesn't discriminate in this either. You can be kindergarten to the grave. Yeah. And wherever you have been put. Yeah. God is already at work in that place. Yeah. And you're there for a reason. Mm-hmm. You're not going anywhere else. You can't be in two places at once. No. That's impossible. But so you're there for a reason. So God has equipped you with abilities, passions, and put you in that context. Yeah. To be able to swing the bat for that sweet spot. Yeah. And we've been hitting it off the edge too long. Yeah. Or we've been thinking, well, God needs to call me to Africa. Yeah. Or God needs to call me to China. Or God needs to call me to the pulpit. Yeah. When those are not necessarily who's going to be called to go to these places. Yeah. Like there are places as a pastor. Now I feel like I'm called to be a pastor. Yeah. And even more so to narrow it down, I'm called to preach. Like God called me to preach. And I'm called to be a pastor as well. So there are places today even that I can't go, that other people can go. Yeah, for sure. Like there's some businesses not going to call me to their business because they separating church from their business model. Yeah. I can't go. A lot of teams, even today as a youth pastor, I can't go into the schools anymore. Like there's certain principles that won't allow us to come into the schools because somebody ruined it because they tried to have like a evangelism day at school. And it's like, they don't want that in their school because they have to cater to all religions, which I understand 100%. And so, but you are called to be in there because you go to school there. Right. You're called to be in the athletic building because you work there. You're called to be in, wherever you are because that's where you work or serve or go to school or whatever. And so God has called you to be there. That's why you're there. Yeah. And so that to me is the sweet spot. Yeah. And I think there was a point in time where we were trying to be everything for everybody everywhere. Yeah, absolutely. And I think we're arriving at this point where it can't work like that anymore. Yes. Like we have to own our part of things, and Pastor Derek used that quote on Sunday about how a Christian community is like a chain, and every link in that chain has to play its role in order for it to be functional, Yeah. And we have people in our church that are in a multitude of different arenas, and in order for us to find success as a church, we all have to play our role in those areas, and loving on people and serving people and discipling people in those areas. We were talking before we got started here about how, and you mentioned a second ago how the word calling was hijacked to only mean missions or vocational Pastor. Ministry. Yeah. Right. And I think I hope we've reclaimed that some to not just mean God called you to preach. God called you to be a youth pastor. God called you to go to Africa, Yeah. And God does call people to those things, absolutely. But just as much as he calls people to those things, he calls people to working at the city government. Yeah. He calls people to being teachers. He calls people to working at wherever, Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the biggest shifts for me was like recognizing that I wasn't only called when I arrived at the big thing God had told me. Right. Right. I was called all along the way. And by treating the areas that I was in, I was while I was doing my church internship, I was a data entry clerk at a school district. So nice. So half the day I was spending, your boy was sitting at a computer doing data entry. Right. And exhilarating. I'm telling you, that was the best time of my life. No, but it was and I did that for all 3 years that I was doing it. Right. And I think I had this moment where I was like,
I'd wake up and at the beginning I would just like dread going to work because I'm like, man, come on, God, this ain't it.
Right.
This ain't what
I ain't called to this.
This ain't what we talked about.
Yeah.
You know, but like I had to recognize that while I was doing this internship and God was developing me and growing me, to eventually become a pastor, he was also developing me and growing me in this job that I was doing. Right. He had placed me around people in this job to have impact as well. Yeah. And if I only treated the internship like a calling and I didn't treat this job like a calling, I'd have missed it.
Absolutely.
I'd have missed it. And I think I really had to like reshape my thinking about that because like, if I didn't view it like a calling, I wouldn't treat it like a calling.
Absolutely. That's
and
right.
I would be disrespecting what God had entrusted me with in that season.
In that context.
Yeah. Moment. And I look back on it and I'm like, man, I'm glad he gave me that moment of recognizing it. And there's always a temptation to do that because there's somewhere all of us are trying to get to. Yeah. There's something God has told every single one of us that's like something beyond our wildest dreams, that like a dream that he's put in our hearts of something that he wants us to do and that he's called us to. And it's a beautiful thing because it gives us something to work towards. But at the same time, there's a temptation to try to skip ahead, to try to short circuit the process and not treat what's in front of us now as though it's a calling too, you know? And so I think wherever we find ourselves, we have to treat that as where God has called us to, because if you're there and you're called to anything else, you're called to exactly what he's put in your hands right now.
That's right. Like before we came back to youth ministry, we planted 3 churches, and 2 of the 3 churches we planted, I worked bivocationally. Uh-huh. And there was a moment when during the first church plant that I worked bivocationally, I worked at Walmart for $7.50 an hour. Wow. And so I know the struggle of the struggle is real at the lower end of the wage earning, and I get that struggle. But man, there was a season there where I'm like, this isn't it. Like, God, this is not what you called me to do. Yeah. But one day, man, he woke me up at probably like 3 a.m, which I never understood. Like, God, can't you wake me up at 8? Like, and I'd only been to bed at like 1 because I worked from 4 to 1 in the morning. And he said, I've placed you in a place that is basically the community hub. Wow. Of the entire community. Wow. To reach people that you wouldn't reach in the pulpit.
Man, what a perspective shift.
And it's like, man, ouch. Like, like you want to talk about context and ability, and because I have the ability to talk. I can talk to people like all day. And all we do is sit there and pack boxes. Yeah. Because we were doing the trucks, and all we were doing is moving boxes all night. So we can talk all we want while we're moving boxes. We're in the back room. Man. And man, we had such great conversations. Once I got over the fact that, man, this ain't it, God. Yeah. Like, and I saw it as the fact that God put me in this context. Yeah. And I had the ability to do it. Yeah. And I was passionate about people. Yeah. That I was in my sweet spot in that moment and didn't even know it. Yeah. And it was like, man, then this switch goes off when the Holy Spirit wakes you up at 3 a.m. and you're like, that is it. Yeah. Like, that's it. Yeah. Like, and so it drastically changed everything, man. Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's, at first it's like disappointing. And then when you have that moment, you're like, man, it's an honor that God has put me in this position. Yeah. It's an honor, you know? And because of those types of experiences, I'm consistently asking myself, even in this season, how am I missing it? Mm-hmm. Where am I missing what God is wanting me to see right now? Because there's something that I'm not seeing the right way in this season of calling. And so it's a beautiful thing, man. It is. Yeah. Yeah. And Pastor Cedric is our connections pastor at Christ Community. And each week after the message, he comes up with some questions to send out to our community groups to kind of wrestle with and to wrestle through just kind of create more of a ripple through the message that they heard. And so we want to discuss one of those this morning, and we can share them all, but definitely want to discuss one specific one just for a few moments, because just like Cedric just said, even as a pastor, like somebody who's called, God still could be calling us in do something else, like in our community, in that moment, at a certain time, a certain place. Yeah. And it's not just about, like we said, not just about being called to preach or be called to be a pastor, but he could be calling me to do something specific at the bowling alley. Like I'm at the bowling alley once or twice a week, and because I love the bowl and I love the people and I love the community, and so I just love being there. And so what is God calling you to do in that moment? Yeah. And so, you want to read the questions, or
so the question for us is, what do you feel like God is revealed to you in the past 4 weeks of this series about calling, or what's sticking out, or what thought or idea is God kind of bringing to the surface for you in that whole thing right now?
Yeah, I just like I said a minute ago, I really think God has placed me in a community of people at the bowling alley that a lot will never come to church. Like they won't. And there are some people that say they're Christians, they're Christ followers, and they don't go to church anywhere. Yeah. They just kind of in that mode where they know who Christ is. They just haven't found the right church, or they've been hurt by church, or they just stopped going. And so I have this ability, I have the passion, I have the context to have Jesus conversations with people that may never listen to this podcast, may never come to hear me preach, may never step foot into a church again. Yeah. But God has placed me in this moment in time to be able to have these conversations with people. Yeah, yeah. And I used to get embarrassed to tell people I was a pastor. Yeah. Because the moment you tell somebody you're a pastor, everything changes. The dynamic changes. It all changes. Everything. Their language, their body, they're like, everything changes. My favorite people are the ones that it doesn't change. I love having conversations with those people. Yeah. My favorite phrase is, "Oh, excuse my language," and I'm like, "It's your language. You're not offending me. Like, it's not. Yeah, right. You've never met my dad. Like, my dad has some favorite curse words, and I love him. So, but God has placed me in that moment, man. And this series has kind of shown me those kinds of things. Yeah, where I can have these Jesus conversations without being weird and without having to be embarrassed that I'm a pastor. And actually, once I get a relationship going with people, the fact that I am a pastor is a positive. Yeah. They see it as something that they can trust, Right. That they can, So that for me, that's what's been going on the last few weeks.
Yeah. For me, what's really kind of coming up is just this whole intersection idea, this overlap of these things that God has given you, and I got a real topsy-turvy type of journey, and a whole bunch of stuff that seemingly does not fit together in my life. So, when I was in high school, I was crazy about basketball, and I wanted to play college basketball. I wanted to go to the NBA. That obviously did not happen. Shocker. Yeah. But that's still something that, like, not going to the NBA, but like sports is still something that kind of stirs in me, right? That I don't write off as just this kind of like thing that is just whatever. And and I have a degree in physics, right? Then I'm
the best thing ever.
And I'm on this like ministry pathway, and there's these other like interests and things like that. And I was talking to somebody about that a couple of years ago, and they just told me that they were just like, God doesn't waste anything. No. And, it just brought that back to my remembrance of just like me thinking through and processing, like, what are all of these things? Like, when are these things coming together? How are these things coming together? How do they fit together? And not in a way that I'm like racking my brain and gonna give myself anxiety about it. But there's some curiosity around it because, I think back to like when I first got called to ministry, like working at a church every day was like the dream. Yeah. And I think like as I've grown and developed, I'm now in this spot where I'm like questioning, like, what does God want me to do outside of the church as well? you know? And how do all of these experiences that in this journey that God has had me on, how does it fit together into the things that he's called me to do? You know, and I'm working with my dad and some other folks on this, like this violence reduction thing in the community that we're trying to like implement and do and stuff like that too. So, but it's like all of these things that like, there was a point in my life where I was like, I don't think God's giving me anything. Yeah. And now I look at all of this stuff and I'm going like, look at all this stuff God gave me. Right. And like, how is it gonna fit together into a thing? And I just love that idea of intersection and overlap, that there's all these things that God has given us to fit together, you Absolutely. Know? And I'm even thinking about like, all right, like in what areas do passion and abilities overlap? And what areas do passion and context overlap? You know, how do these things like fit together with one another outside of just, you know, the three? So there's a lot to it. And I know this is probably going to sit with me for a while. And I hope we all continue to just kind of think on this, man. Cause thinking about calling and talking about calling is not like, and I think you even, I don't know if you said it while we were on, but even when we were talking before, like, so there are certain seasons for some callings. Yes. Like there's so I think this is a constantly reevaluating kind of thing. Yeah. And there's certain passions that I feel like God illuminates later on in life. There's certain abilities that you develop later on in life. So it's just such a unique thing, and it's so crucial to how we live sent, how we make disciples, how we do all of the things that God is calling us to do, is how we're living out the task that Jesus left us with. Right. And so I think because of that, we want to do it well. And so we have to constantly be asking that question. That's right. Yeah. And there are seasonal callings and lifetime callings. Yeah. Like you can do either or both. Yeah. Like and I think my hunch, my opinion is that we always do both. Yeah. Like there are some things you're called to do for a lifetime. And there's some things that you're called to do for a season. Yeah. Like for me personally, I'm called to be a husband for a lifetime. Yeah. I'm called to be a father for a lifetime. I'm called to be a pastor for a lifetime. Mm-hmm. Those are things that I believe God has put on my life forever. Yeah. But there are things that God called me to do for a season. Like I coached high school basketball for a few years. Yeah. But I'm not called to be a high school basketball coach forever. But I loved it for the couple of years I did it, and I invested in these young guys, and I discipled them and taught them basketball and life, and so I mean I think we're all called something for a lifetime and something and things for a season. Yeah. But neither one of them trump each other. They all work together. Right. Yeah. Like you said, God doesn't waste anything. Yeah. Yeah. Like even the fact that you have a degree in physics, man, I'm telling you, that's going to pay off someday. Yeah, like something's going to happen. And even if the only thing that it paid off was to get you to this moment, like it paid off to for some degree. Yeah, like that's just the way it works. Yeah, yeah. Like there's never a detour in your story, even though it may seem like a detour. Right. Like the fact that I was in the Army for 8 years. Yeah, and that's part of my story that I didn't even tell. Like after I was called to be a pastor, or I was in the Army for 8 years. Like I ran from it. I didn't want to be a pastor at one point. Yeah. Like it didn't sound cool to me after I got done being called at a conference where I learned that they're poor. Like the only two things I tell people all the time, the only thing I knew about being a pastor when I was a teenager was that they were poor and they had to move a lot. And at that time of my life, I was like, man, I don't want to move anywhere and I don't want to be poor. And so I'm tired of being poor. Yeah. And so I ran from being a pastor for a long time. So even though there's some things that I thought were detours, like God didn't waste it at all. Yeah, yeah. So even like I tell people all the time, like part of my story with the Army, as far as calling goes, is that I went to the Army. Like I had 13 scholarship offers coming out of high school to run track and cross country all over the country. Wow. And I couldn't take any of them because my grades. Man. And so I went to the Army. Yeah. But you know what? Had I gone to one of these schools and ran, I never would have met my wife. Wow. Because I went to the Army. Yeah. And then I went to school after I got out of the Army. I met my wife in college. Yeah. And so I don't go to the Army, man. I never meet my wife. Like the wife I have right now. I never meet her ever in my life. Because she's from New York, upstate New York. I'm from Indiana. We'd have never met if we never met in college. Yeah. And so
that God doesn't waste that stuff.
Yeah.
You know, there's a reason for that stuff.
Yeah.
And he uses it. He redeems it. He works it out to the good of those who believe. So
I'm telling you, detours by design.
That's right. Amen.
By design. It may be a detour to us, but it ain't one to God.
Never.
As we wrap up, I'm gonna just start these other questions just for folks to think about and process.
Amen.
With a friend, by yourself, in your journal.
Yep.
First one is this: where do you think your sweet spot of serving might be? And your sweet spot being the spot where your passion, abilities, and context intersect. The second one is this: how do you need to be a more faithful steward of what God has given you? That's going back to this whole idea of serving, being in our sweet spot and serving. And the last one is the one that Mike and I talked about. What has God revealed to you about your calling in the past 4 weeks of this series? What's coming to the surface? What are you constantly thinking about as it relates to it? Where do you feel like God is leading you as a result of that?
Amen. And I encourage you, if you haven't yet, today is March 25th, 2021. And I encourage you, if you have not yet listened to all 4 parts of this series, go back and do so. We got them online at ccclive.org. You can download our church app. It is Christ Community Church GA. Download our church app and you can get all of our messages off there as well. That's probably the easiest way to do it if you have a smartphone. And you can engage. We got all of our events online. We have all of our community groups online. All that stuff is online and on the app. We just love to connect with you. We'd love to walk through this journey called life with you.
Absolutely.
And as always, we always have a seat for you on Sunday morning. We'll save a space for you.
Always.
Services are at 9 and 11 at 4078 Mildred Road, Christ Community Church, ccclive.org. And we thank you for joining us today on The Ripple Effect. And for Cedric Hill, I'm Pastor Mike Hofer, and we out.
Peace.